In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Ave Maria, gratia plena Dominus tecum, benedicta tu mulieribus et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus.
Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostre. Amen.
In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Brethren in Christ, laudetur Jesus Christus.
In secula.
I'm here today with normally my co-host, Kennedy Hall, but today we're going to actually do an interview for his new book. But before we do that, I want to wish everyone a happy feast of Our Lady of Victory.
Mm-hmm.
Today is the Feast of Our Lady of Victory. This is the painting that I put up every time we pray the Ave. And this is, I want to just talk about this for 2 seconds because this is the patroness of our whole apostolate. The painting is The Battle of Lepanto by Tony Stafke. And Tony was kind enough to allow us to use this all over the apostolate. And so I think this painting is a really great modern rendition of what was going on. If you don't know what was going on, this painting pretty much says it all. You have the forces of good on the left and the forces of evil on the right, represented by the Mohammedans. And you have Our Lady in the middle with the sword in her hand. Kennedy, any words you want to add about Our Lady of Victory?
It's inspirational for today because we face a seemingly impossible political situation. And I don't just mean Donald Trump, but I mean just reality versus unrealities, I've been saying, and we got to pray. That's all there is to do. I mean, it was an impossible victory that the Christians had against the Turks. And if it hadn't have happened, Europe would be very different. I mean, revisionist history is a fun game to play, but whatever it would have happened, it would have been different and it would not have been good for the church. So there you go.
Yeah, if you want more on the story, check out our video, Mary Against the Mohammedans, where we talk about all the amazing victories that Our Lady has won for us and for Christendom against impossible odds, as always, because that's the way that God works. So today we're going to talk about Kennedy's new book, Family Be Damned. This is a novel about the lockdown. We've been promoting this, and today we're going to have an interview, which is kind of nice because Kennedy and I typically are just kind of going back and forth, but today I'm just going to interview him, and he's just going to talk for most of the time here. So Family Be Damned, it's a novel. Kennedy, what made you want to write a novel at a time like this?
Well, I think that novels are a good way of telling a truth that is hard to tell with something nonfiction. So, when you're trying to tell a truth that's sort of like a big narrative about something that's very important, it can be hard to do it with a nonfiction because, well, you have to stick within the bounds of what's actually happened in nonfiction. In a fiction, you can make up your own story. And when people read the book, Mike Church was gracious enough to give a nice blurb, and he said it's kind of part catechesis. What else did he say? Part catechesis. Do you have it on the thing there? Part catechesis.
I wasn't ready. I'll put it was like part catechesis, part documentary,
yes,
part thriller.
Yeah, part thriller. That's right. So, because I thought, the little expression "stranger than fiction." Like, there's just something about fictional stuff where you can create a perfect situation where you can explain the point that you're trying to explain. And it's just hard to do that with nonfiction, obviously, because it's about things that have actually happened. So I thought with the lockdown, I have been a lockdown skeptic since the beginning. Just more on the spiritual side, the psychological side of what are we doing here? This is insane. This is an insane thing to do. Even if it was the Spanish flu, this is still insane what we're doing. Because, I realized we kind of lived in a world where this lockdown thing has been the clearest piece of evidence for me that the world does not believe in God. Like, the world is a functionally atheist world. And it's not even therapeutically deist. You hear this term, therapeutic moral deism or something, this idea that you at least have this idea of the Father in the sky, which helps you sleep at night. We don't even have that because people are so afraid of dying. They're so absolutely afraid of dying that they would rather be locked in their homes, like people that are on voluntary house arrest, than risk a very small chance of dying. And that to me is absolutely nuts, once again, regardless of how serious it was. So when I realized that, I thought there's something really spiritual at work here. I'm a little bit maybe out there, but I always thought it was interesting that it's called the coronavirus because that's the word for crown. And we live in this world where, we've uncrowned the kingship of Christ. And here we are locking ourselves in our homes, scared of death, but Christ conquered the grave. Anyway, I just thought this was a perfect, one day I was just kind of sitting there and I thought, I'm just going to write a novel about this. And, I was inspired by some of the stuff I'd read in the past, literary styles. And so I chose to use a letter format and use that as a way of showing the psychology of how devils would try to bring down a family during the lockdown. Because another thing as well is one of the things that I really saw, because I'm a teacher by trade, I really thought about how the kids were going to be affected. And I have young children. And I thought about, it's hard enough for somebody who has the faith to get through this weird time. What about people who don't have the faith and they're thrown home and financially strapped because you lose your job and all that? And I just thought, man, this is a breeding ground for festering mortal sin. So I thought a novel would be a good way to talk about how to navigate through that.
Yeah, that's great. I love what you're talking about, fiction and what you can do with fiction. What are some of the works that have inspired you, either with this work or just in general in terms of fiction?
Well, I'm not a huge fiction reader, but the most of the fiction that I've read has been from C.S. Lewis and G.K. Chesterton. Father Robert Hugh Benson wrote that book, Lord of the World, which is about the Antichrist and stuff. Actually, it's quite prophetic. And one of the things I like about C.S. Lewis's work, I know he's not Catholic fully, but his mind was great, and he knows how to get to the psychology of a man. And when we're trying to understand the demonic, we're trying to understand psychology a lot. And we have a real, you've talked about this. I think you did an article for 1 Peter 5 about good psychology, bad psychology, something like that. And I think you did a show on that too. And, psychology, the classic definition of the word basically means like the health of your soul. I mean, psychiatry has a similar etymology as well, understanding the soul of the person. But we live in this world where we don't have a Christian anthropology anymore. We don't see the person as body and soul. So psychology becomes a very materialist thing. And when you do that, you completely, you cut the branch off that you're standing on, and you fall off the tree, because the mind is housed in the soul. We know this as Catholics. The intellect and the will are in their metaphysical properties. They're not material. The senses and things affect them. But, this battle that we have against the actual demons, not just the mental demons, but the actual demons, it's going to play itself out in how we're tempted, our interior dialogue in our mind. And I was inspired by the literary style of Lewis and Chesterton. I love the English literary style there. And I thought I would try to emulate how I've learned from them and how I wrote this book.
Excellent. So the theme obviously is family. Can you explain the title, Family Be Damned? Mm-hmm. What is going on with the title?
Play on words. On the one hand, our society, I work for the Fatima Center. I'm an actual kind of a Fatimist. So, the decisive battle will be against the family. That's one of the things Sister Lucy said. And yeah, you see that today. I mean, the family be damned, like from just an idiomatic expression, like, oh, whatever be damned, like the family be damned. I mean, who cares about the family, right? It's all about the state. It's all about the system. It's all about the, I don't know, fill in the blank. And the family is whatever our overlords want it to be. The family needs to be a certain size because we have too many people, or the family needs to be kids got to go to schools in a certain way at a certain age, because that's how we do things in this society. Family be damned. You better listen to the government, so the church has the proper understanding of how the family is. The Bible has a proper understanding of the family. It's a primordial unit that God created in the Garden of Eden. And but now in our society, and this sort of ties into education a bit, a good person is seen as someone who's a good citizen, and a good citizen is seen as somebody who's a good contributor, and a good contributor is seen as somebody who contributes whatever they deem good to contribute. And it has nothing to do with the supernatural end of your soul, which is the beatific vision, which is spending eternity with God. And if your family is in a shambles, it's going to be very hard for you to live a life where you're going to get to heaven, because you're not going to be living in a state of grace, and so on and so forth. And, in a way, I would say it kind of explored some of the themes that I wrote about in Terror of Demons, which was a nonfiction, but that was about it is about building up strong men for the church. And in this book, there's a emphasis on the father a lot and his role as the spiritual head of the family. And I thought this book was useful to show how the father is so pivotal in the health of the family. And literally his conversion can make or break the actual salvation of the family in some ways. So I think that, and then so family be damned, there's a play on words, but then also the goal of the devils is to damn the family. So there you go.
Absolutely. So you've spoken a little bit on this show from time to time about your reversion to the Catholic faith. You talk about it in Terror of Demons. Can you tell us more about your own family upbringing,
Mhm.
and what was that like? How did that influence you?
Yeah, so my mother is an Italian immigrant. Ciao a tutti gli italiani che stanno guardando commissione. So I'm Catholic culturally. My dad, actually, I think they're English Catholics. Something must have happened. There's English blood. It's all English blood, only a couple generations back, but no one ever talks about England. So I don't know what happened. Maybe they left because they were English Catholics or something. It's weird. We never talk about it. But so my parents separated when I was young, and so I was raised kind of in a modern family, remarriages and all that. And love my parents. This isn't meant to disparage them in any way at all. Okay. But they're classic post-Vatican II people. I mean, my father was an altar server till he was almost 20, and then the mass changed, and then no one ever went to mass again. My grandmother, God rest her soul, Grandma Pie, actually, we called her that because she made so many good pies. And she died when I was, I think, 22. So that was about 10 years ago, actually. And she was a faithful woman. She went to mass, daily mass when she could, until she couldn't drive anymore. She kept the faith, but not a single one of the kids in the family still goes to the Catholic Church. A couple kind of went Protestant, and the rest are just lapsed. My mom's side, faithful Italian Catholics, my mother's parents. My nonno, who I dedicated Terror of Demons to, was a faithful Catholic. We never talked about religion explicitly. He was, if you know any Italians and you know the language, it's a Catholic language, So like God, in a good way, is used, you talk about il Signore, oh, si vuole il Signore. The God's will is always talked about because it's just a way you talk, even if you don't practice. So it was part of our culture, but we never went to mass. I barely remember going to Christmas or Easter mass growing up. Fast forward, when I was about 12 years old or so, had a major sort of, it was actually a non-denominational youth group, and I had sort of a come to Jesus moment. I didn't know what that was. And so that's why I'm careful. I'm a traditionalist and all that, but I am careful about charismatic renewal and stuff like that, because I know that for like honest hearts that are just kind of seeking things and they don't know things happen, So I'm very grateful for that moment. But I had no formation. I went to watered down Catholic schools, learned nothing, like literally nothing about Catholicism in all those years. And in some ways learned things that were antithetical. By the time I was done university, I pretty much lost my faith. It's basically an agnostic-y, secularist, humanist, whatever. Couldn't really become a full atheist because I respected my nonno too much. And he was a faithful man. And I just sort of, through every moronic element of my personality, I still, for some reason, by the grace of God, held on to a little bit of intellectual integrity. So I thought, if I'm going to be an atheist, it better be really true. But if it's not really true, then this God thing's real. I looked at it kind of like a Pascal's wager thing before I even knew what that was. So, and out of respect, I don't know, I guess my parents, they have all the values on a sort of broad scale that you would have in a faithful era. So they taught me things like, you should honor your ancestors and things. And when you're from the family of immigrants, that's a big deal. So I wasn't going to just accept this idea that like my European Crusader ancestors were bad. I couldn't, because I'm like, those are my people. Those are my team. I'm not going to say my team is bad. And also my high school was the CCH Crusaders. So that was a big deal.
Right on. Yeah.
So
yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry to cut in. So you speak English. Mm-hmm. You're a French Canadian. You also speak French. You also speak Spanish, and you were raised Italian. You also speak Italian. Which culture has influenced you the most, and which family member?
Well, I'm actually from an English part of Canada, but you have to study French here. So I did intensive French studies. So I'm actually like an Anglophone, but because of my Italian family, and I lived in Italy for a time as a kid when I was 13 and 14, just over a year. We lived in my mom's old village, medieval village, little church in the piazza, walled-in city nearby, and it was wonderful. So I have a language ability. That's why I picked up French. So whenever I speak Spanish, French, or Italian, I can. It's funny because I sounded like I'm from the country, so I can kind of confuse people that way. Anyway, so Italian is like Canadian and Italian. I mean, Canadian is really a British sort of culture. My dad is very patriotic, wonderfully patriotic Canadian. And so I really, at one time, I had an Italian professor who I was friends with at university. He asked me if I felt more, he was from Italy. He was here on this like teacher exchange thing. And he was interested because he had come over and he saw, it was the first time he'd ever seen the diaspora of Italians who came over in the 60s and earlier. And he said, it's so interesting because I go to these Italian shops and stuff in Ottawa where I was living. And he's like, it's like Italy from 1965. And in Italy, the country has changed, but Italian Canadians are still 1965. He said it was amazing. It was interesting for him. So that was the Italian culture that I was raised with. But so he asked me, "Ti senti più italiano o canadese? Do you feel more Italian or Canadian?" And I said, I'm 100% of both. I am not saying that in a relativistic sense. I would go to war for my country. I like Canada is my home. My nono came on a boat here with my mom's family, and I'm very grateful for that. But there's something in your bones about it, and so I'm both. So the Italian side and the Canadian side. So one of the reasons why I actually found tradition in the church was because I was looking for my historical tradition as an Italian, as a Roman. So I was looking for Roman Catholicism, and those two things were linked together.
And what part of Italy was that? Because I know Italy as a country is pretty new, since 1870 or so. What part of Italy did you come from?
It's actually younger than Canada, technically. We're 1867. It's Lucca. So Lucca is near, it's outside of Lucca, a little village called Vorno, nella regione Capanori. It's in the Capanori region. So that's about 45 minutes west of Florence.
Oh, okay. So it would have been outside of Florence, but was that in a certain Italian kingdom historically? Lucca was its own kingdom? I don't know.
Lucca was its own kingdom.
All I know is Kingdom of Naples and Sicily and Papal States and all that.
So Florence.
I know Florence was its own.
It was
state as well. Yeah.
So we're 20 minutes east of Pisa, where Leaning Tower is. I honestly don't know if I know Lucca had a wall around its city. Okay, but I don't think there was a castle.
Oh, okay.
So I don't know how that is. It might have been like a vassal state of a kingdom.
Oh, right.
But they have the same, very similar dialect, which says a lot when your language is very similar. So I actually didn't speak Italian very well before I went over. I was just finished grade 7, but I went into like an Italian public school, just regular. It wasn't like an exchange thing. It was Italian all day and whatever. And so I learned that dialect, but I was lucky because in that region, they speak Italiano standard Italian, which is Florentine, because the official dialect of Italian, it's like in Spain, they speak Castilian. In Italy, they speak Florentine.
Right. Yeah, that's a whole nother show we should do sometime is language, because that's very important with the political history. Yeah. So would you say one of your grandmothers maybe was the number one influence on your faith and your life?
No, my grandfather.
Oh, okay. No. Right. Okay. So grandfather, maybe. Mm-hmm. So one of the interesting themes in the book that's a lesser theme, but it's very crucial that I want to ask you about is the role of grandparents. And because there's definitely a generational breakdown that we're dealing with as Catholics, but what is the role of grandparents in the life of the family?
It's funny. I'm looking at, this is actually a picture of my nonna.
There we go.
I love them very much. And they both passed away, but there's no, he's the man. Anyway, get misty-eyed thinking about them. But grandparents, so this lockdown, one of the things that just ticks me off is what we're doing to our elderly. They shouldn't be shoved away in these homes. And not just because of the coronavirus. Okay. I saw this when my nono and nonna were dying. And family dysfunctions, I'll keep those things private, but I didn't want them to go into the home, but I'm not power of attorney. My mother did not want them to go into the home, but there was just, they don't want to be a burden. It's the whole thing. They've been living in Canada since 1967. They've been they've retired and whatever. I just realized when they were in the nursing home, the people that worked there were wonderful. It's like, hey, people that work in public schools are wonderful, but they're not your mom. People that work in nursing homes, they're wonderful, but they're not your children. They don't love you in that way. And that's fine, And historically in the church, we have had nuns, like, you think of the Sisters of Charity and stuff. Like, we have these orders of nuns who do this sort of nursing home work, but it's also based in Christian charity, right? So it's a different level. I mean, they're willing to, you heard about these nursing homes, and old people were getting left alone for like days at a time. It just makes my blood boil. Because of people were scared of getting the coronavirus. That doesn't happen with a nun. That doesn't happen with a Saint Damien Colokai, right? Or is it Molokai or Colokai?
Molokai. Yeah.
Molokai. That doesn't happen because he's like, if I get leprosy and die, sweet, I'll get a higher place in heaven. That's awesome, right. And anyway, the only thing, so if you don't have saints and you don't have sisters and religious brothers and stuff, you have to have your family, which is the norm. Okay. The nuns and stuff, they always filled in the exceptions, right? They were your exceptional parents when you were orphaned, but your family needs to be there. Okay. And we need to take care of our elderly better. I realized that. I thought, oh my goodness. I mean, and no one ever asked the elderly what we should do. I mean, maybe they don't want to stay in there. Maybe they're okay with dying because they're 87 and they thought, yeah, I've got 4th stage, whatever cancer. If I go get the coronavirus, at least I want to see my grandkids because I don't want to see her watch Wheel of Fortune for the next 6 months, And anyway, so multi-generational living is so important. And I know it's not always possible, but it's possible like 90% of the time that people don't do it. Unless your elderly are real sick and like have incontinence issues and whatever. But even then, like, it's this teleology that we've messed up in our society. We don't have a Christian anthropology, so we don't know what the human person is for. So we think about our lives, and I'm sorry to go so tangential here, but we think about our lives as like these cookie cutter stages, which I talk about in the book, where, my successful retirement will be X, Y, and Z. It's like, listen, this idea of going to Florida and staying there or Mexico or whatever for 6 months of the year, that's a total anomaly. Historically, your retirement was you helping to build up your children's family and being there as like second parents, and you have like a family estate. And so all of these things that get in the way of us taking care of our elderly, they're superficial. And yeah, anyway, sorry.
Yeah, I'm trying to resist the urge of just yelling amen and preach it because another topic, because the treatment of the elderly is an absolute offense against Almighty God. Crying.
It drives me insane. Me insane. Anyway, and so
well, you say the demon. One of the demons says in the book, quote, multi-generational living used to be normal for the humans, and it was in fact a problem for our purposes as the family unit was thereby strengthened. So how does the influence of grandparents, and could you break down what you mean by multi-generational living, and how does that influence the faith and protection against demons?
So first, on the natural level, you learn virtue from your grandparents and wisdom. I mean, even, we love our native cultures, right? And we always talk about the elders. Okay. That's important. You learn from your elders. So, one of the things you realize when you work with kids, whether it's ministry, education, whatever, you realize that they don't know how to do anything, right? They don't know how to do anything. It's not their fault. They don't know how to do anything. Well, of course they don't know how to do anything because dad and mom are both working, and that's not abnormal. Moms and dads have always been busy. The 9-to-5 mom is a new thing, but obviously farms and whatever. There's always been things going on, but you would have grandma and you would have great uncle. I mean, in Italy, I call my aunts and uncles, great aunts and uncles, I call them aunt and uncle. And like, uncle so-and-so, great uncle so-and-so may as well be your grandpa because they're just all so close. And you learn from great uncle so-and-so. It's like great uncle so-and-so taught you how to fish or how to do your woodworking, or great aunt so-and-so or grandma so-and-so. The point is just from a natural level, you have this democracy of the dead that Chesterton talks about, this real meaning of tradition. And the word tradition means to pass along for safekeeping. That's what the etymology of the word is in Latin. So just on a natural level, you learn virtuous habits. Okay. On the supernatural level, older people have been through it. Okay. If you're like, paint a scenario here. You're 40 years old, you got 5 kids, cash strapped, whatever, you lose your job. That sucks, right? Well, if you're just looking at things from your perspective, then that really sucks. But if your dad's living with you or your mother's living with you, then it's like, it's not so bad. Because don't worry, son. For one, we've got money because we're helping each other here, and that's fine. Like, this money is for the family. Okay. That's what's important. And secondly, son, let me tell you about when this happened to me when you were 6. You remember when that happened to me? We got through that. So don't worry about it. I'm going to take care of the kids. You're going to go and find work wherever you got to find it. And we're going to make this whole thing work instead of, we're on our own and we're trying to figure just so. And then also too, when you're the head of a family, things can be very hard. So you need people who aren't in it like you are, but are around you to just remind you to take a breath and to pray. And older people always do that. My no, God rest his soul, he was an amazing man. And I remember one time I was talking about a cousin who was, we thought she had a head problem. My no goes, so-and-so, did she just get broken up with? And I said, oh yeah. He says, c'è una malattia di cuore. She says, no, she's got sickness of the heart. Give it 2 weeks, her depression will go away. And even the doctors are like, I don't know the source of this depression or whatever. And then give it a couple of weeks and like medication stops, the mind numbing. He's just like, I'm 85. I've seen it all, buddy. You know, so you have to have your grandparents around.
Yeah, absolutely. So now one objection may come from, and came from the chat just now. Well, all those guys are boomers. We don't want to have anything to do with those boomers. Who cares about them?
Well, I mean, my generation sucks too. There's some good ones in us and there's some bad ones in us. I mean, I think I'm the only one of my friends who got married. Me and my wife were thinking about the other day. We thought out of our graduating class of about 250 people in high school, I think I can think of one family that came out of that class, or like one person who kind of got married, like actual Catholic. And there's a Catholic school, has a bunch of kids. Not that you have to have kids, but I mean like open to life. Point is actually living. That's one. So I'm just, all generations, good and bad, depending. The boomers were raised by somebody too, right? So, but also one of the reasons why the boomers are the way they are is because they inherited this fragmented, non-multi-generational system, where they went to the systems, they went out to the schools, and they all move halfway across the world in different places because now we can fly everywhere and whatever. And then grandparents aren't around, and both parents work. I mean, so they're victims as much as anybody else. So I think, you know, Chesterton said, people say you can't turn back the clock, and he says, yes, you can. If the clock is wrong, you turn it back, and you have to. That's dumb. People, you can't turn back. Of course, you can turn back the clock. So, you know, set the thing right, and then start over. You know, and I think that we should do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you want to point the finger at anybody, you can point the finger at the generation which came. The generation before the lost generation. The lost generation was the one immediately following World War One. Mm-hmm. So basically, the generation that's fighting World War One kind of messed things up. I mean, but even before that, you could even point the finger back further. I mean, there's so many different things. But I want to get into some other topics. Oh, go ahead.
Adam and Eve.
Yeah. Let's blame Adam and Eve. Exactly. So you have the demons say at one point in your book, I'm shifting to other aspects of the book. You say, quote, the sort of relativism needed for them to view the nature of the family as a changeable thing is no doubt the result of our past endeavors, the demons. Not least of our efforts has been the notion of evolutionary theory, end quote. So what would you say is the single greatest ideological threat to the family? Would you say evolution, or would you say something else?
So evolution, so it's like Platonic philosophy, right? One of the problems Plato had was he tried to, like we know there's 4 cardinal virtues, right? He tried to have this idea that there might have been some super virtue, you know, like this Platonic form of forms, you know. So I think in the negative sense, when we look at vices, okay, we can get things down like to the 7 deadly sins, okay. We can't really, I mean, pride is the primordial one, but even then we got to break it up a bit to understand it, you know. So as far as like a primordial heresy or a primordial error that I think really messes with our understanding of truth today, it's really pantheism. Okay, that's why we've always had polytheism, pantheism versus monotheism and a creator rather than being part of the creation. Okay, and we see that in the world today. It's monotheistic and it's Hindu, right? It's kind of the, you know, pagan tribes kind of on the pantheistic side, whatever. So evolutionary theory is just a modern instantiation of that. And the problem with it is that it's such an intellectually bankrupt, nonsensical, farcical theory. I'll tell you how I really feel about it. But because it involves this idea that there are like fixed truths and laws that facilitate complete randomness. It's so nuts. So with that, we have this evolution of truth. I mean, you know, there is no real morality, okay, because things are in constant flux. Okay, so then therefore, I think I say in the book, you know, the humans think that, you know, the idea of something being a modern family, demons love the word modern, hence modernism, because, you know, as if something's different on Thursday than it was on Tuesday, it's still ontologically the same thing. A family is a family is a family. There's no such thing as a modern family. There's just family, and then it's healthy or unhealthy. Okay, it's Christian or non-Christian. So evolutionary theory has completely taken the underpinnings out of Scripture. It's completely taken the underpinnings out of trusting the church. And then, if you say, well, the church was wrong about Adam and Eve, the church was wrong about this and whatever thing. So contraception, the church was just wrong about that, and abortion, the church was wrong about that. Divorce, church was wrong about that. Follow it all you want. And that's why I think that, if you ask the average person who's a secular person to try to make sense of some big issue, 9 times out of 10, they'll use evolution to make sense of it. That's the unholy gospel of the devil. And it's his scriptures. It's a bottom-up theory of primordial ooze, which we're supposed to think is science. But if you talk about a created garden, you're somehow believing fairy tales. It's nonsense. So I actually say in the book, paraphrase, but I say the irony about evolutionary theory is that they say it facilitates the survival of the fittest, but only the unfit minds of the generation will believe such a farcical theory. So here you go. So that's how I feel about that. So it affects the family a lot.
So, and what do you see with the connection with Fatima? What is the connection? Do you see any connections between evolutionary theory, which came from a British man in 1850s, and before that, of course? What do you see connections between evolutionary theory and communism, the eras of Russia?
So Stalin was in the seminary, or he was going to. They say he was in the seminary. I think he was being taught by priests and things. You used to say things like the young man went to seminary, but it was kind of like a junior seminary, because he became an atheist around the age of 13 or 14, if I'm not mistaken. But it was after reading Origin of the Species, which he read mostly in a night. He couldn't put it down. And Lenin was a big evolutionist as well, and they all were, Hitler, whatever. Marx actually said, he wrote to Engels, and he said, I have found the historical underpinnings for our view, basically. And when he read Darwin, they were contemporaries, publishing at the same time.
Right.
And this is around the same time as the Immaculate Conception is defined, which is against evolutionary theory, if you think about it. Because
can you explain that?
Well, because Adam and Eve would have had to have been conceived as per evolutionary theory, which means they would have had immaculate conceptions because they would have been clean of original sin, which we have to believe as, or we're not in the church, right? It's an anathema sit sort of dogma. So therefore they have to be created specially. However that happened, I don't know. I'm just saying they have to be created specially by God. That's a dogma. And therefore Our Lady is the only one who's been born without original sin. They were created without it, but not born without it. She was born without it. Anyway, except for our Lord, obviously, but that's different. He had an inside hookup with God there. But so evolutionary theory is it has it's linked like a web with communism, because communism is ultimately evolution of the state from a deistic demigod political leaders. And one of the biggest attacks of evolutionary theory has been on the family, of communism has been on the family. If you look at what the Russians did, the Russians went so insane on the family that they had to call it back, because they realized they were destroying the family to the point where they couldn't run their society anymore. So in the beginning of the Russian Revolution, churches were destroyed and religion was outlawed. They even got rid of marriage, because technically, if you think about it, you can't have a wife because you can't have any property. Hold on, I'm not saying your wife's your property, but you say to each other, I am yours and you are mine. You belong to each other. Your wife is your property, and the husband is in that marital sense, you're each other's property. You can't have that in communism. So they literally got rid of marriage. They had public women, which were basically publicly funded prostitutes. The kids were taken away to gymnasiums, which was just like these state-run orphanages. Total diabolical nonsense. They instantiated abortion. It was the first place where abortion was a legal thing by the state, was in communist Russia. And they realized they were going so hard that they couldn't even have a communist state. So the eras of Russia, though, the state exists in competition with the family. The family is a competitive sovereign entity, and they don't like that, which is why they have to control it, which is one of the reasons I wrote this book, because what they did to families was they isolated families during this lockdown. You couldn't go see anybody else, okay? Which any half-awake sociologist would know that would lead to higher divorce rates. Lo and behold, we see that, so on and so forth, and there you go.
Yeah, that's one of the quotes, actually, that I plan to cite in my own work. You have a great line about the sovereignty competition between the state and the family. And we're going to get to some questions, if anybody has questions or comments, in just a few minutes. But I want to ask you about we've talked about grandparents, we've talked about mother and father on this channel all the time. What do you see as how are young people getting back at the faith? And this is something that you've experienced in your own life and the dynamics. Why are young people seeking the faith? Why isn't it just breaking down and they're just becoming all hedonists? Why is this happening?
Well, we've seen this before. Okay, I'm going to recommend here, everybody, my favorite book. It's not Timothy Flanders' Introduction to the Bible. That's my second favorite book.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah. It's Everlasting Man by G.K. Chesterton. It's a wonderful audiobook if you can get it to. It's the man who read it was an excellent stage actor, so he reads it perfectly. Pagan civilization. How's Chesterton put it? Okay, he says basically you look at pagan civilizations, you have a period of warmth and playfulness, and you have a period of diabolism, and it always devolves. Okay, because ultimately paganism is demonic. Okay, but the devils in a way do want you to be happy to a point because they don't want you to believe in them. So they want to keep you occupied with your Netflix and your video games and all that, right? So in the ancient world, you would have the warm paganism, he would call it, of the countryside, the Italian countryside, the gods of wine and the forest, and it's almost like a fairy tale. Usually would involve some sort of perversion and things like that and some mortal sin, but they don't want to tell you about that part. And then you devolve into cultures like Carthage, or the Babylonians, where it's almost like an ancient version of a communist state, where it's very mathematical, it's very regimented, it's very successful, it's very technologically advanced, but it's completely diabolical in the morality, child sacrifice, so on and so forth. The Aztecs were like that. Amazing technology, insane morals. We're in a state like that right now. We're in a neo-pagan society where we have devolved into diabolism. And we have magic tricks by our wizards who call themselves scientists. There are real scientists. I'm being a little facetious here. We look to prophets of the forces of nature like Elon Musk. And we've lost our faith. Now, the problem with that, though, is you ultimately are disappointed. And the devils are so prideful that they ultimately show their hand, which we're seeing during coronavirus. That was the things that piqued me to the diabolical nature of this as well. We have people openly lying to us. Okay, duplicity is one of the signs of the demonic, saying one thing, doing another, being sneaky. We see that with everything that's happened, all the experts saying one thing the next day, same interview, they say do different things. And people are getting upset. And this is why you see these movements right now, like QAnon and stuff, and I'm not advocating for it, but the verbiage around it is this idea of an awakening, because people are waking up to the fact that they've been conned. They're waking up to the fact that feminism, communism, all the isms that promise them utopia have ruined their lives. And there's two responses to that. One is you devolve into a zombie who gets addicted to your pleasures and you just say whatever, evil images, drug use, whatever, which some people do. That happened in the pagan societies. They would devolve into the most insane cannibalism and things. On the other hand, though, we have the natural law written on our hearts. We are made for God, and our hearts are restless until we rest in him, as St. Augustine says. So we look for something more. And right now, people are looking for something more, which is why it's the traditional faith. It's the Eastern liturgies. It's the traditional Latin Mass. It's the hardcore, old-school catechisms that are getting people fired up because they want truth, and they're tired of watered-down nonsense, and they know that the world is evil. And they want a clear vanquisher and victory over that, which is why they're looking for the good old stuff. And that's why I think that there is a resurgence of this piety in people our age.
Excellent. So one of the themes or just sub themes that goes throughout the book is the role of science and technology. And one of the things that was struck me just now that you said, how the Aztecs or other sort of demonic cultures developed this advanced technology. So my question is, if the church really gave birth to science,
yep,
then why is the demonic so involved with technology and science?
Well, the church gave birth to science insofar as the word science means knowledge or something, basically. It means to know something, conscience with knowledge. That's why you did it against your conscience, con science. It's an ordered way of knowing things. It's one of the most effective ways. It's basically empiricism, put to the physical, which is good, which is great. And you have to have that within a traditionally classical philosophical framework, so you can understand the teleology, the direction of things, what a person is for, and how to use these things. It's kind of like Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility, that famous line or whatever, because it's an amazing tool. Okay. But it's a tool. Okay. It's not the tool maker. It's not the craftsman. It's not even the instruction manual how to use the tool. That's all from the human mind. That's all from that's all from, the axiomatic principles that are built into us just by being made in the image and likeness of God. And when we forget those, then we become like a kid with a loaded gun, and we can start killing everybody basically if we're not careful. It's honestly, this is why comic books are so appealing to people, is because they play out for people in modern. Oh, somebody coming in. There you go. They play out for people in modern images. Who is that? Titus, Dad's working. Say hello. Say hello.
Hello.
Right. Hi. All right. I got to finish. Go downstairs. Oh, there's Shiloh. Oh, there's Clover too. They're all just got up from their nap.
We were really hoping to have an authentic dad moment, and we just did. Ladies and gentlemen.
This is my home office. It's my bedroom.
Oh, yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, the authentic Catholic dad moment.
Yeah, there you go. We tried to get their nap, so that's fine. They're good. They're going downstairs. Oh, yeah. So we've lost the understanding of Christian anthropology and things. So science is just basically like, it's like the Wild West. I was watching this coronavirus thing. These scientists today, it's pretty great, actually. They're a bunch of mainstream Oxford, Harvard, these kind of guys. And they're coming out and saying, hey, no lockdowns are bad for people. And it's good because they're not fringy. They're mainstream people. And I'm listening to them talk, and they're saying good things, but it's like a Swedish guy. It's all people from very secular places with wacky morals. But even they're just looking at it and they're going, the lockdowns are immoral. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to ask them what they mean by that? What do you mean by it's immoral? Why is it immoral? Anyway, and I'm sure that I don't mean that to criticize them, but it's interesting because we can't escape that. Okay. So if we have and the flip side is they were saying that they're not saying that they're basically saying like, they were saying that medicine had to be within a moral framework. Otherwise it wasn't even good medicine. I thought, isn't that interesting? And that's what science is like. Okay. And then just real quick, we'll get to the next question, but evolution is an example of that. It's not science, it's history. So when you get rid of your history, when you get rid of your philosophy, you start to use things that aren't supposed to be used for jobs they're not supposed to be used for.
Yeah, absolutely. We've covered that before on this channel. I want to close out this interview with talking more about the children. Mm-hmm. Children are a big part of this whole novel. The whole family is involved. Do demons have access? I guess let me put it this way. What access do the demons have to children, if any? And how do we prevent that?
Well, in the old rite in baptisms, there are exorcisms on the kids. They're supposed to be in the new rite. They just don't do it. You can ask for it. If you're getting a new rite baptism, insist on it, because they still have it. They're still priests. They're still saying the prayers, so they're good to say. But there are exorcisms for a reason. Whether that's inherited through sins of the parents. I mean, I've heard that can happen. And Father Ripperger would be a guy to consult on those sorts of things, generational spirits and stuff. But anyway, as far as what the demons can do to the mind of a kid, if the kid's living in a state of grace, hence proper baptism, they're obviously living in a state of grace, but then proper exorcisms, then at a certain point, they're going to have reason, and then they can commit their own sins. And then at that point, they're going to be playing on the same level as an adult, in a sense. I mean, over the age of 7 or 8 or 9, I mean, you can commit mortal sins. Certain sins you wouldn't be able to commit, I guess, until you're a little older, because you wouldn't have full consent of the will, and that, you could talk to a good priest about that. But nonetheless, so I guess if they're going to attack kids, then it would be through demonic things from not having the proper baptism or proper exorcism prayers, I guess. And then when they have reason, they can use that. So little children, as long as they're like baptized and, living in a state of grace and stuff, I mean, I think for the most part, they must be protected in some way. They have guardian angels. Teach your children to pray to their guardian angels a lot. But yeah, I mean, this is it's a jungle out there, you know. And your children are not safe unless you make them safe, you know, and that's what you have to do as a father.
Right. Yeah. And so I want to get to some questions. If anybody has questions, comments for Kennedy and his book, and once again, Family Be Damned, Kennedy Hall. The link is below in the show notes to order. You can both get the ebook copy and secret. You can buy the ebook that gives Kennedy more royalties. So if you really want to support Kennedy, buy the ebook. But the paperback is also available on Amazon too. So there's a lot of talk in the chat, and I've seen this before, where there's a lot of back and forth as to who is to blame for divorce rates, the breakdown of the family, in terms of men or women, the father or the mother. So, Kennedy, can you settle for us all, for all time, who is more to blame here, men or women?
Yes. Well, okay. There's a reason why it's called original sin. It's from Adam. Okay. Because man was created first. He has ultimate responsibility over the goings on of his own home. He's supposed to delegate things for the various roles in the family to his wife and to his children. So this is why, you know, for example, my wife is pregnant with our 5th child. Thanks be to God. She's healthy, but she's having a hard pregnancy physically. And you know, so there's a lot of days where I got to do that's why I took a year off from work, from my regular day job, was to be home. And, there's a lot I got to do, you know, of things that I don't have to do when she's healthy. It is what it is. If those things don't get done, it's ultimately my fault. That's just the way it is. I mean, obviously you can have your hierarchy of needs. I mean, like if we were planning on repainting the bedroom or something, and then her pregnancy got real hard, it's like, well, sweetie, we're not going to do that till late. I mean, there's other things I got to do right now, but I don't get to say, you know, I'm not going to clean the house, or I'm not going to make sure that the fridge is stocked or something because you're not here to help me. It's nonsense. You have to sleep less. You have to get up earlier. You have to do more things, and you have to ask for help, and you have to figure it out. So I guess as far as divorce and stuff, listen, blaming somebody is silly. That's an effeminate thing to do. I'm sorry. You know, I watch these. Have you guys ever seen like men's rights activists and MGTOW, men going their own way? I saw it a couple of years ago. It's a secular movement, basically, to give men a fair shake. And that's admirable, because our society is really anti-man. But I watched an interview with a guy, and I just was like, you whiner, you know, you're the women. And then I'm just like, shut up, you know, pull up your pants and just sort it out. Okay. You're right. The divorce court system is nonsense. All of that stuff is nonsense. I've seen it firsthand. It is completely rigged against the man. I mean, the mom basically has to be completely off her rocker to not have custody of the kids. And more often than not, a judge is going to believe that a man is a second coming of Satan just because he used to have a cigarette habit or something. So that sucks. But guess what? Suck it up, buttercup. Nothing else you can do. And that's all there is in life. So get on your knees, get out your rosary. You know, there's a guy I know who's very heroic. I won't tell who he is, but he was going through a situation one time where, like, I couldn't believe how well he was holding it together. He inherited this child from a previous relationship. He had a major conversion. The child was suicidal, but the mom was, but he couldn't even get custody. It was so unfair against him. And this guy had every reason to just break down. And he just said, okay, I just got to pray my rosary more. And, you know, and things aren't perfect, but man, the strength that guy had. And he could have been a total whiner, but he wasn't. So whoever's to blame for divorce, Satan, I guess, ultimately. So that's why you should read my book and figure out how to protect your family from the demonic.
Perfect. Yeah, exactly. I love what you said there, Kennedy. I mean, we're very much of one mind on all these topics. The men can't have it both ways. They can't be in authority and then not have more responsibility. That's what authority is. Authority means more responsibility. Yep. So that means you're more responsible than your wife for everything that goes on in your family, period. So if you want to throw blame around, that's effeminate. Take charge, do it. Anyways, let's see. Few questions here. Alberto Amparo says, does Kennedy feel that we've reached the level of destruction attack in the family, as he talked about with communism back in Russia? So the early communism that you discussed when they were just debauchery, are we at that point?
Well, I don't think we'll be at that point explicitly. Okay, it's kind of like this. I don't think, well, okay, at the end times, which maybe tomorrow, I never make a comment about when that is, because Christ says to stay watchful. So just stay watchful. Pray a rosary, be in a state of grace. It's all you can do. You know, French Revolution. Okay. One of the reasons why we're not going to see that again, except for an extreme scenario, is because it created too many martyrs. They prefer a frog in the pot, the boiling frog that boils slowly and then loses his faith and dies in a state of mortal sin, rather than somebody who has to go to the guillotine, gets freaked out about dying, dies in a state of grace, and goes to heaven. Revolutions are ultimately demonic. You know, all these anti-Christian movements, they're all ultimately antichrist. They're ultimately from the devil. So as far as Russia, that was, you know, the devils are like crackheads. Okay. The devils are like gamblers. Okay. They get drunk on power. They're so prideful. They want to be known for who they are. They want to destroy everything. They want to be behind the scenes, but at the same time get praise for everything. So they're just, they're just completely drunk on their own evil. Okay. So they showed their hand too much at the beginning of the French Revolution or the Russian Revolution. They showed their hand. I mean, you can't slaughter all of your own people and expect them to run your communist society. And so they had to pull it back a bit. Okay. So as far as that can happen, I don't see that in that way happening again. Instead, I just see what we have seen. Contraception is a healthcare. You know, abortion is contraception. Marriage is redefinable. Education should be done by anyone but the parents. Divorce is what you do when you've had a bad 6 months. You know, I mean, the point is we don't need to go there because they get all the souls damned anyway. That's a little bleak, but that's what I think. And we see that in the church. You know, all grace comes into the world from the church. And when the church has a wacky liturgy and effeminate preaching and no morals, you know, and no understanding of dogmas, then the world will follow. And people will just stick around, sit in the pews, think they're Catholic, but die in mortal sin. And the same thing will happen with families.
I love what you say. Let me ask you this. Father John Hardin, not a trad, said that the United States is the most powerful Marxist country in the world. He said that around 1990. On that point regarding the frog and the boiling pot, would you say that the United States and sort of Western Europe in general is a more successful Marxist revolution than Russia?
I understand what he's saying there. And when we say trad, we should probably broaden that out to say traditionally minded. His theology was as bang on as you can get. But yeah, he didn't say the old mass, I guess. But yes. I mean, I think I think as soon as we got rid of, as soon as they committed regicide, the killing of the king in France, everything from there has been Marxist. I mean, Marxism is just revolution, and revolution is as old as the devil. I mean, Marxism is Lucifer. So we have a godless society, and it's very powerful. So in that sense, I guess, yeah, it's very powerful. Now, but I want to say, though, the devils can never completely get rid of virtue, because they need, even in their evil men, they need courage, you know. So there's always this razor's edge of their evil men might convert because they're actually trying to do something that they think is good. And there's always a little piece of good in there. So yeah, we got a Freemasonic Marxist society, sure, but we still have this love of patriotism. You know, that's a good virtue. You know, we still have a love of freedom of religion is completely misguided, but you still see here in America, well, across the border, I'm in Canada, there's a culture war, and there's a culture war because it's an open battlefield, you know? So yes and no. I see what Father Hardin was saying, but yeah.
All right. KMO says, Kennedy, what are your thoughts on the impact of feminism on men, women, and the family today?
Well, I guess you have to define feminism. I mean, so often when you're talking to people about feminism, they just sort of move the goalposts and say, oh, it's about voting. And it's like, well, that's a civil rights issue, whether you should or not. I think there should be less people voting in general, and ultimately, hopefully, only on the local level, and have good kings. But anyway, if we mean by feminism this idea that like men and women can be the same, that's just nonsense. I mean, all men can't be the same. You know, like I can't be the same as Tim. We have different skills, you know, different physical characteristics, different intelligence. I mean, we're just different. You know, even the New Catechism talks about this. There's natural inequalities in people. We can't sort those out amongst people of the same household. How are we going to sort it out amongst people of different households of different genders? It's just so it's a utopian nonsense that this idea that we can all just do everything the same way as everybody else. And it goes against people's nature. I mean, Jordan Peterson, when he was super famous, would talk about this instance in Sweden, where they basically tried to really push engineering on women and they tried to push nursing on men, because it was about 80-20. Because men, generally speaking, are more sort of with their hands, tactile, pragmatic thinking, whatever, math. So they went to engineering, okay? And then flip side, nursing, very nurturing, that sort of thing, very feminine traditionally. So they tried to push those things they tried to make engineering look more feminine, and they tried to make nursing look more masculine. The divide ended up getting worse because the men who were attracted to nursing were attracted to it because they were, and I'm not saying it's wrong, but they wanted to be in a feminine environment. And the women who were attracted to engineering wanted to be in a masculine environment. So they wanted it for the fact that it was masculine, vice versa. So feminism, if you mean everyone can be the same, not possible. If you mean that there needs to be a greater awareness, and there does. So I'll give the feminists some credit here, okay? What's it called? That conference in 1848.
The Seneca Falls.
Yes. Yeah. Well, see, Protestant family dynamics, Protestant male authority in the house is very different than Catholic male authority. It's not sacrificial in the same nature. So you know what? Give them credit, okay? The madman household where the dad's working in a way and comes home on the weekends and cheats. I mean, that's bad. That's bad. So yeah, rebel against that because that's evil. But the Catholic family is one where the father is Jesus Christ and he dies for his bride, who is the church. And so it's a very different sort of thing. There's a great article, Get Principles, Christendom Colleges Magazine. It's an incredible article. It's about 3 or 4 years old. If you look it up, like, Get Principles Magazine, Thomas Aquinas and the Family and Fatherhood, something, you'll find it. I read it and I was shook by it. I actually sent it to a Protestant friend and he loved it. And it talks about the traditional understanding of a father in the home and the symbiotic, like, I guess the sort of synthesis between the man and the woman and the roles they had. It's not Protestant. It's very different. And that's why my Protestant friend, who's a very faithful Pentecostal guy, he read it and he was like, whoa, I really got to rethink some things. And so feminism rebelling against a fallen, bastardized version of fatherhood and husbandry. Okay, I get that. But the solution is not this myth.
Absolutely. Yeah. We'll take one more question. John Joyce says, what happens when good men resist the social revolution? Do you think it could get to the point where things are so evil that unbridled violence is inevitable?
Well, yeah, I mean, for sure. Historically, that's happened 1,000 times. There's no reason to think it won't happen again. I don't know when it'll happen. I don't want it to happen. It doesn't have to happen in every circumstance. But, I think we're in a period kind of right now. I think we're in a period in the USA. Okay, I'm in Canada, but, we have an old expression. Pardon the pun here with Corona. You guys sneeze and we catch cold. Okay, that's our expression in Canada. So right now, we're, I think, in a situation kind of like Spain was just before they had their civil war in 1933. What happens when you have a society that's going through a social revolution, culture revolution, sorry, it creates uneasiness, it's unstable, and it exasperates differences between people. And what you have there is you're going to have a strong man arise, meaning you're going to have somebody like a Franco. Donald Trump, I don't think is that man per se, but the mythology around, the folklore around Donald Trump, it's priming people for a reception to that. The strong man could be good. He could be bad. He's usually mainly evil and a little bit good, or mainly good and a little bit evil. Franco was really good overall, as much as they don't want us to whatever, but he was also merciless in the way that he dealt with problems, and there's probably some unjust war actions that happen. I think America's primed for that. I think Europe will probably have that in some countries very soon. I was reading an article in Italy today that Conte, who's the devil incarnate, and he's like Macron in France, and he wants people to wear their masks in their home, and they're going to be checking on people being in their masks in their home. That's insane. That's absolute insanity. That's just like, that is, I can't imagine being at that boardroom and hearing that and asking, like, is he trolling us? Is this a joke? Like, we're evil and everything, but we can't even do that, So I think maybe, but I don't know when, and I hope it doesn't happen around my house.
All right, and one last quick question: what was the name of that article again that you just referenced?
So, Get Principles magazine. Something about Aquinas and fatherhood. Okay, they only put out one major article a month from that magazine. It's like a nice essay. It's easy to find, and yeah, it'll be something about that fatherhood, Aquinas, Aristotle. It's like Aristotelian Aquinas fatherhood. Won't be hard to find.
Father's presence in the home. Is that it?
Might be, yeah.
I just by Cuddleback, John A. Cuddleback.
I think so.
The highest court in the land has now redefined which is.
Is it from like 2018 or 2017?
Doesn't have a date here. Maybe it's in the bottom. It does not say, actually.
Okay. Well, you know what? I will find
I'll just put this in the chat in case it's the right one. And yeah, if you can find it, Kennedy, we can have that show notes just for everybody who's listening or watching. So any final thoughts to wrap us up, Kennedy?
Okay. Buy my book. I'm just kidding. No, but okay. We need a resurgence of Catholic art. Okay. One of my favorite cultural commentators is Andrew Klavan, the Daily Wire. I like him a lot, actually. I don't agree with everything on Daily Wire. Ben Shapiro was kind of too much for me, kind of liberal, I guess. But I like Andrew Klavan. He's actually not a Catholic. He's just sort of an Anglican. He was a Jew, became Catholic. But I love his cultural. He's got he's like in his 60s, I think. Is a really interesting way of looking at the culture. And he's an established novelist. And he's actually been an inspiration for me. I should have talked about him earlier. But he is of the opinion that you shouldn't make explicitly Christian art because you'll get pinged as like sort of Christian writer. I disagree with him on that because he's talking as a Protestant. The greatest art in the world has always been Catholic art. Because ultimately the true, the good, and the beautiful is fulfilled in the Catholic faith. So I think we need Catholic artists out there, whether they're painters or writers or whatever, make really Catholic stuff because Catholicism is the most beautiful thing on earth. We processed the Virgin Mary around Parliament the other day in Toronto, the Ontario legislature. And the pictures we have of that beautiful Fatima statue, that famous one, that one of the 30 or so in existence, they're miraculous today. The backdrop of the sort of colonial era inspired sort of neo-Gothic architecture of the Parliament building, which is a beautiful building. That statue in front of it, like it'll make you tear up. It's so beautiful. Catholicism is so beautiful, and our world is very ugly right now. And we need very, very inspired Catholic art. So I wrote this novel because we're not going to solve the problem in the family with theological manuals. We're not going to solve it with conferences. We're going to solve it with a complete reorienting of how we see the world, and by bringing the light of Christ and the love of the Blessed Mother in that world through the beauty of our faith and beautiful art. And I hope I wrote a book that will give people, Mike Church said to me, he said at one point he was weeping. And because I did that on purpose, I hope that the story does that for people because it's just so beautiful, he said. And we need beautiful art for people. So I hope people will buy it because I wrote it as a labor of love, not to just make a buck. I mean, yes, hopefully it supports my family and that's great, but I loved writing it and I want people to read it and I want people to fall in love with their marriage. I want people to fall in love with the Blessed Mother, and I want fathers to heed the advice in it and mothers as well and raise good families.
Amen to that. And it has been an honor and a privilege to work with you, Kennedy, to publish your book as Our Lady of Victory Press. We're really happy to put this thing out. So please get it, buy it. Link is below, just to support Kennedy. Also the art. I love what you're saying with the art. This is so fundamental. We're not going to convert the next generation with a bunch of theological manuals. That is so fundamental. I love it. So many more show topics to go over, my friend. So everyone, please share this video, like, subscribe, become a patron. You get the book for free if you're a patron at a certain level. So we want to thank all our patrons. Just a reminder to patrons as well, we're having a patron-only live broadcast this Saturday, 4 p.m. live. We're going to talk about the new encyclical Pope Francis and other topics of your choosing. So make sure to tune in for that. Hope you can make it. In the meantime, we're going to offer up our Father for just pray for. I want to pray for Kennedy and the success of this book. Kennedy is a father. We featured him because we want him to make money on this book, because you're a father. You do have to make money and you have to be successful. And he took a year off from work. He's got a baby number 5 coming. His wife's pregnant. Please support him. Buy his book. So that's what we're here for. And we hope the book blesses souls, converts them. And we pray for all families and for your intentions. So
thank you.
Let's offer up our Father. Nomine Patris et Filii Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Pater noster, qui es in caelis, sanctificetur nomen tuum, advenit regnum tuum, fiat voluntas tua, sicut in cielo et in terra.
Panem nostrum quotidianum da nobis hodie, et dimitti nobis debita nostra, sicut et nos dimittimus debitoribus nostris, ne nos inducas in tentationem, sed libera nos a malo. Amen.
In nomine Patris et Filii Spiritus